We are on to item number 3, the public hearing item, and this is the public meeting and recommendation report for Brookfield, which is a matter that has brought any number of people here tonight. And if we give our attention to our planner, we can get the synopsis with which we will begin our discussion tonight. Paul? We need microphones at the podium.
Test. There we go. Okay, good evening, Mayor Burton and members of council. Before you tonight is a revised zoning bylaw amendment application, which is why it is a dual public meeting report and recommendation report. And this is on the site at the southeast corner of Lakeshore Road West and Brookfield Road, being a consolidation of 3 properties at 174 Lakeshore Road West, 91 and 87 Brookfield Road. In terms of the neighborhood, just a quick synopsis. To the east of the property are existing 2-story townhouses. To the south are single detached dwellings. To the west are 2-story townhouses as well, and directly to the north is commercial plaza uses. Just in terms of the history, quickly on this site, so starting just with the official plan, the land use designation for these properties is Central Business District. It is also within the town's growth area. Quickly, just in terms of the intent of the official plan policies, it is the intent that lands within the livable, within the Central Business District designation serve as a Main Street function, being that they could potentially accommodate residential and commercial intensification opportunities. That being said, there is a height limit specifically within the Central Business District designation of up to 4 stories, subject to meeting certain criteria, which is outlined in section 1119 of our official plan, which I'll get into in a moment. In terms of the existing zoning, the 2 properties at 174 Lakeshore Road West and 91 Brookfield are zoned Special Provision 625 R8 zoning, which currently allows for up to 7 townhouse dwellings, and then 87 Brookfield Road being zoned as R04, which allows for a single detached dwelling. Just to quickly tell the story here in terms of the history of this application process, this is the original concept plan, which included 33 apartment units in a 4-story proposed apartment building, with 4 townhouses at the rear of further south on the property along Brookfield Road. The application included 400 square meters of commercial. In terms of the setbacks, if you look at the setbacks, and I'll kind of just scroll through some of the design plans here. So they proposed a 4-story height limit with a tiered design concept, as well as the 4 townhouse units further south on Brookfield, as I mentioned. This is just the proposed elevation from Lakeshore Road. This is the proposed south elevation looking north on the site at the 4-story apartment building. I'd like to point out that the setback was very minimal in terms of the basically the building line. So the underground parking garage would potentially allow for a 0-meter setback under this original proposal, while the building face would be up to a 6-meter setback in this proposal. This is the east elevation. And just before I get into the new revised concept, I just want to quickly explain just some of the history here in terms of what happened subsequent to the initial public meeting when you originally saw this application, which I believe was back in, well, the application was received in April, so it was back last summer. In terms of what happened, we had a few workshops and a number of resident working group meetings with the local councillors, as well as some of the residents in the neighborhood. Comments that we received from that are and issues were traffic generated from the proposed development, shadowing, overlook, and privacy, access to parking, height and density, grading, the extent of the commercial land uses, and the implementation of the proposed design. Subsequent to staff as well as the residents submitting these concerns, the applicant revised the application and came back with the plan that you see before you right now. Basically what happened was the built form was altered along the site to minimize setback or increase setbacks, specifically from the townhouses to the east, to allow for more privacy and grading concerns to be addressed, as well as overlook impacts. The removal of the townhouses was also included, and by doing so, the applicant proposed to extend the building from north-south. And this is a proposed revision in terms of west elevation, so still utilizing a tier design. The townhouses in the original proposal were 2 meter setback from the southern property limits. The revised proposal shows a 6 meter setback, and again, as mentioned, using a tier design up to 4-story building heights. This is the north elevation as shown. In terms of the south elevation, so as I previously mentioned, the building was set back 6 meters in the original proposal. This proposal looks at a 7 meter setback from the property line to where the underground parking garage would start, and further from that, 14 meters from the property line to where the actual building face would be, as shown here, as well as 2 floors of underground parking. And this is the east elevation, which would look for which would be the elevation looking from the townhouses to the east. So as I mentioned, the original public meeting was held on April 29th, and previous meetings or subsequent meetings were had with the residents working group. In terms of the built form of the development, staff is of the opinion that the built form, including the scale, height, and massing, is compatible to the surrounding neighborhood. The applicant has shown appropriate setbacks and transitioning in height between different land uses and the built forms. All parking for the both residential and commercial uses is located underground. And the revised proposal minimizes impacts in terms of grading, access and circulation, privacy, and microclimatic conditions such as shadowing. Staff further note that within the recommendation, we are recommending that the urban design guidelines, being Appendix D, are to be further implemented through the site plan stage, which will ensure that the site be developed in a manner that is consistent with the revised conceptual plan. In terms of other issues that were just noted that staff would just like to clarify, there was concerns about the actual designation of the property in terms of concerns that 87 Brookfield was designated as low-density residential. Staff have looked at this issue, and if you look at the image on the right-hand side of the screen, this is also contained in the report, but I'd just like to quickly explain this. So essentially, the Central Business District designation, as you see on the left-hand side, parallel to Burnett, extends along the R7 zone that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, further to the east, and then there's a jog, then it goes up Brookfield. Staff's interpretation based on this is that the jog is consistent with the end of the property line from the townhouse development to the east and would extend consistently across there to Brookfield Road. So that would encompass all 3 properties as consolidated in this application proposal. Furthermore, there was, I know, some questions in terms of what InZone was proposing on this site in terms of being a 3-story development and the potential that that may be more appropriate for this site. I know staff have looked at this, and this specifically, this is in terms of the draft zoning as it stands today. And I note this because this looks at the zoning, draft in zone as it relates to developments that are adjacent to low-density residential within a central business district. So within that, we would allow a 3-story height limit with 0 meter setbacks to the, basically on the lakeshore limit. To the rear and to the side, it would be a 3 meter setback limit with 3 stories going vertical from there. Staff are, and like I guess on this slide, I'm showing the proposed setbacks that we see in this current application. And staff note that these setbacks, as well as the tier design, is, in our opinion, a very appropriate design for this site and would really assist in mitigating potential impacts. And we've had an opportunity to work with the applicant to try to minimize these impacts, and we feel that the proposal meets our good planning principles and achieves the requirements of our official plan. So as such, staff are putting forward the following recommendation. I would just like to also note that for recommendation number 4, There is a memo before you in terms of the bylaw. We are just revised that bylaw in terms of some clarification issues related to amenity area. So we'd just like to note that that memo includes a 4-meter setback of the amenity area from the rooftop limits, being the south and east rooftop limits. It also includes a 20% maximum of amenity area space on the rooftop. And it also just provides clarification in terms of the definition of amenity area.
Thank you. Do you speak to the question of whether or not the amenity area can be covered?
Yes, I can speak to that. So under our current zoning as well as our official plan, a 5th-story height limit would not be permitted. We've drafted our zoning bylaw as such so that only 4 stories would be a permitted use on this site. If they were to make an attempt to apply for a 5th story, it would not meet our official plan policies and they could not build a 5th story. There's also questions of whether or not they could build the amenity area and then just put a small rooftop over it. And that would not meet our zoning bylaw as well, so they could not do that. So it'd be capped at 4-story.
Okay, so there's no cover or roofette.
Correct.
Now, council, pardon? That's what I'm looking for. Thank you for reading my mind. Councillor Duddeck moves the motion to proceed past the hour, which takes us till 10:30. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Councillor Duddeck.
Thank you, Your Worship. Given the time constraints, I think the majority of my questions have been addressed in the body of the report and the investigation or the review that both myself and Councillor Demoff have done. Just one question, and that pertains to the trees. One of the letters in the attachment to the report from a resident cited that of the 67 trees, 10 were being saved, and of the 14 municipal trees, only 2 were being preserved. Can you confirm that, those figures? Is that in fact the case?
Right, so basically right now in terms of the streetscape along Lakeshore Road, there is obviously, as most of you are obviously aware, there is basically a ditch that kind of happens right after the sidewalk, and the majority of these trees, yes, would be removed because of this application.
But I guess the other concern I have is of the 14 municipal trees, why are we permitting 14 of our municipal trees to go and only 2 staying?
That's a great question. I think this is an application that is within our central business district, and we're trying to achieve a more urban compact built form, specifically along Lakeshore Road. And I think to achieve that, we're going to have to potentially remove some of those trees along that Lakeshore Road frontage.
Okay, thank you.
So you wouldn't consider that you could preserve the trees by pushing the front of the building back enough to permit the trees to stay? I mean, we have an urban fabric that everyone prizes where we have trees on the commercial street, so it's kind of jarring to see this to us. Did you have any thought about pushing the building back to make tree room?
Right, so I think that once the grades are basically altered to allow for an urban streetscape to happen, where you have your basically your road and your sidewalk connecting directly to your pedestrian or your storefronts along Lakeshore Road, there'll be an opportunity for future tree planting to happen to add to that urban canopy. But those trees to achieve the built form that as proposed would have to be removed.
Madam Director.
If I can just add to that, you will note in the report that there is a list in Appendix D of requirements for site plan should this development proceed, and it indicates that the owner should be made aware the streetscape treatment enhancement both within the Lakeshore Road and Brookfield Road right-of-ways will be required to the satisfaction and at no expense to the municipality. Streetscape treatment includes but is not limited to the provision of hard surface paving, decorative paving, street tree planting, employing enhanced routing techniques that are our standards.
Thank you for clarifying. So, Councillor, I gather we'll get some back. We hope. Well, no, I think we can do better than hope. In fact, you're on site plan, as I recall. Councillor Elgar?
Yes, can you tell me what the elevation difference between, to the east, between the top of the building and the bottom of the townhouses to the east of it?
So this elevation that you see up on your screen here, I think does a decent job at depicting that. I don't know the exact geodetic elevation in terms of where their townhouses are at. They have been developed lower in terms of the grades than this proposed development is. But basically, if you look at the parking garage, it is slightly basically at the line of the first floor of the townhouse development.
So it's at the top of the first floor
Correct.
of the townhouse, at least the first floor for sure. So it's definitely a lot more than to the people to the east, it's an awful lot more than a 16-meter height, isn't it? When they look at it, they would see a lot more than 16 meters high.
Looks like they might see 22.
Right.
At least. Okay. Is there any drainage area in that section?
Yes, so there's a 7-meter buffer in terms of where the property line is to where the underground parking garage starts. So within that 7 meters, that would allow for grading and drainage to occur. Unlike the original proposal, which there was not, so this would accommodate that potential grading and drainage to function, as well as potential landscaping.
Okay, you mentioned amenities. What do you mean by amenities? Like, we're used to rooftop mechanical.
Right.
But you've introduced something not mechanical anymore. It's called amenities. What's an amenity?
Right, so similar to the Mattis project at Maurice and Lakeshore, they have a rooftop amenity area cap where they can use the rooftop for amenity space, subject to a 20% cap of the total roof area. It would be very similar to that proposed development.
So just, how does that fit with our central business development, our district under 13.2.6, where we want to make sure we have privacy for the residents, like right next to it? How does that work? Does that help?
Right, so a couple things. So we've included it within our bylaw, setbacks from the east and southern property limits where the rooftop amenity area can start, as well as there's going to be obviously that 20% cap of the total rooftop amenity area. Further, in addition to that, through the site plan process, we'd be looking at potential heights of the parapets, et cetera, further setback to mitigate any potential impacts, or rooftop screening with landscaping features to mitigate any potential impacts. And that's been included within our urban design guidelines for this proposal.
We could say the amenity area would only be that facing Lakeshore Road, for sure?
Lakeshore Road and Brookfield Road, potentially, yes.
But Brookfield also?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. We have Councillor Duddick and Councillor Demoff. And before we go to Councillor Duddick, I want to indicate that it's very unlikely that we'll finish before 10:30, and so at that time, if we haven't finished the meeting, I will recess the meeting until tomorrow evening after site plan, and for the sake of clarity, I'll say 7 p.m. So that everybody knows where we're going with this. Councillor Duddick.
Yes, thank you. Through your worship, building on what Councillor Elgar had focused in on, explain to me why we have created this amenity space issue as being the norm versus the exception in buildings within the area. Like, I'm wondering why we even, it seems like more and more the applications we see, it's a given that we give a developer amenity space on the roof. And we're always faced with this issue of setbacks and privacy. Why are we not just restricting it to rooftop mechanical, full stop, and not providing them an opportunity to have amenity space up there to begin with?
Right. Through you, Your Worship, I think obviously there's a demand aspect, absolutely, from whether it be the developer, or whether it be a future purchaser, of having that potential space, whether you have a barbecue usability space up there or what have you. So there's that perspective. And obviously staff, we take a look at that, and we're obviously going to try to, I guess, mitigate impacts on adjacent uses. But at the same time, I think it comes down to a demand and social issue, right? It's like, I think we do want to have amenity space for people living in these buildings. Whether it be inside or outside, obviously there's a demand for it to have it outside, and if we can mitigate impacts, maybe a rooftop amenity space is not necessarily a bad idea.
But if they already have balconies,
Right.
it's not like they don't have outdoor space. So I guess my concern is, similar to what we were discussing with the school board issue previously, if a developer is trying to provide something from a market perspective, why shouldn't they be providing it within the building envelope that we would be restricting them to, i.e. 4 stories, and say, that's up to you to decide how you want to do it. You provide for your own amenity space and do not go over and above what the 4-story maximum limit is.
Perhaps,
Sorry, if I can just answer that. We do have requirements in our bylaw for our growth areas to intensify. And through this development, like all developments, we have to balance that with our needs to manage the growth in a way that's set out in our plan, directed to our growth areas. And that form of growth comes in a more compact urban form, as Paul was indicating. And so through our assessment of this application, we assess the form and its amenities, including whether or not rooftop amenity space or balcony space is appropriate at what locations, through the assessment of all the impacts. And in this particular instance, there is a request to provide for that, and we've provided for restrictions and limitations on it to ensure that impacts are mitigated.
Madam Director, I wonder if, Councillor, let me ask about this. Madam Director, I think one of the things that Council and I are concerned about here is they could provide amenity space for residents if they had fewer residents, if they were less, it seems like they could use their land any way they want, including leaving enough room for amenity space. But because they choose to overdevelop and not have amenity space, they seek to put it on the roof. And so a request for amenity space on the roof reads to some of us on council, if not all of us, as a request to assist them in overdeveloping. And were they to do fewer units, and in order to provide the amenity space in a normal way, they would still be intensifying over what's there now. So it comes down to, I guess, as in all of our trickier planning decisions, it comes down to where is the balance? And I hope I haven't just answered my own question. But you've agreed. I'll make it a question and you've agreed. Councillor Demoff, thank you for your patience.
Okay. Can you go back to the slide where you listed the reasons why, that one. Built form is compatible with surrounding neighborhood. I have a hard time seeing, a 4-story building with the rooftop amenity being a form that's compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. It just does not seem compatible whatsoever. So I'm having a bit of a stretch there to see how this building is compatible. How did you come to that conclusion when you were going through that?
Some of the critical elements in terms of that would specifically be the revised setbacks as shown. So the 7-meter setback, like I had mentioned, I'll just quickly flip back to this slide. The 7-meter setback just from the eastern property limit to the underground garage would allow for grading, drainage, and landscaping. And additionally, the 14-meter setback along the eastern limit to where the building starts is an appropriate setback in terms of mitigating potential impacts of going up to a 4th floor. Additionally, from that, along the southern property limit, there's a 6-meter setback, as well as the transitioning in height. Staff are of the opinion that this is an appropriate way to mitigate impacts on low-density residential uses to adjacent sites.
Okay, I guess, I'm looking, as you said, single-family residential that are all, low-density residential that are all around it, and then to have immediately to go to a four-story building, to me, isn't any kind of transition whatsoever. You've gone from single-family homes to, boom, a wall of a four-story building. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Others? So, Councillor Demoff, to assist everybody, considering the hour, would you like to give an indication of where you and Councillor Demoff would like to go with this?
I think you meant Councillor Duddick.
I'm sorry. It must be the lateness of the hour. I just had an old man moment. Councillor, let me start over. Councillor Duddick, would you and Councillor Demoff, please, do you want to give any consideration to that?
Actually, could I assist you just for a moment, though, because there's no one that's more knowledgeable on this and has done more work on this than Councillor Duddick, so I want to make sure that she is the one speaking to it.
Yeah, and I think I may have actually said Councillor Demoff and Councillor Demoff.
It's the D&D.
It's
okay.
the D&D.
It's okay.
So I apologize for my my tired tongue.
Okay, that's
and,
okay.
And Councillor Duddick.
I have an indication of where we're going to be going on this, but I'm concerned that I would like to have an opportunity to hear from the residents and their representative for the residents, as well as the applicant, if he would like to speak. So I'm just concerned. I don't want to circumvent that process.
Okay. I don't want to short circuit it either, but I guess everybody can already tell that you're not very enamored with the proposal. All right. Madam Clerk, would you call the delegations, please?
The first delegation is Denise Baker, here on behalf of the Dunn Street residents.
Brookfield.
Oh, listen, I am so glad that
that
I'm not the only one who made a mistake. This is wonderful. Now, if the rest of you will all, make a token mistake, the evening will be saved. Ms. Baker, you're welcome, and we're looking forward to your information. But you don't have to make a mistake.
Thank you. I don't promise I won't. In light of the hour, a number of the residents had indicated that they had wished to speak, and we believe that we've been able to dress it down just so that only I speak. But they did raise concerns that I might not get the whole story told in the 10 minutes, and therefore I may beg your indulgence to go past the allotted 10 minutes. And so if that's the case, I do hope you'll bear with me. I'm just going to put forward for you, if I may, onto the overhead, the reasons why I'm here. And I'm here to ask Council to refuse the application before you for the following reasons. The development does not conform to the official plan designation for 87 Brookfield Road, and therefore an official plan amendment is needed for the proposed development on that portion of the site. The development does not conform to the official plan, particularly with respect to section 1119. The application does not respect the in-force area-specific zoning regulations, and there's no land use planning justification to approve a development above and beyond the maximum zoning regulations in terms of height, number of stories, and density. The proposed development is out of character with the existing neighborhood and is not compatible in terms of transition, height, size, and massing. And the proposed development represents an overbuilding on the site, which is a site that's on the very periphery of the CBD, where an appropriate transition to the stable residential neighborhood is supposed to take place. When I speak to the official plan designation, Mr. Demchuk provided you with a bit of an overview, but I would like to give a little bit more background on why we were quite surprised that the applicant was not required to make an official plan amendment for the portion of the site that's known as 87 Reynolds Street. Brookfield. That's my one mistake.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's staring me. This is the town's produced GIS mapping. This is not mapping that we produce. This is the town's produced GIS mapping. Staff indicates that the entire parcel of land that is proposed for the redevelopment through this application is CBD, and in that case, that would be all red there. And part of the Kerr Village growth area in the OP. And we certainly accept that interpretation as it relates to the properties known as 174 Lakeshore and 91 Brookfield. But we do not accept that application as it relates to 87 Brookfield Road. Throughout Livable Oakville plan exercise and following its approval in 2011, the southern part of the site was shown as having a low-density residential designation on the town's own GIS mapping. It's also critical to know that 174 and Lakeshore and 91 Brookfield were amalgamated as part of a previous development application for a site-specific special provision 625, and so they were considered a single site that would have had frontage on both Lakeshore and Brookfield. 87 Brookfield does not have frontage on Lakeshore. Therefore, there's no real logical connection as why that would be designated CBD. But most importantly, this is the mapping that's been available to and relied upon by the public. It's well known that OP mapping is not precise mapping, which is why this GIS mapping is produced to add that level of clarity. This interpretation regarding the residential designation on 87 Brookfield is consistent with the existing in-force zoning mapping, which you will note that 174 and 91, this is also town-produced mapping, 174 and 91 are residential 8, special provision 625, and 87 is RO4. This interpretation that 87 is a residential designation is also consistent with the way planning staff initially interpreted the official plan when they put together the in-zone. This is the original draft in-zone mapping, and it's unfortunately, because it's not very easy, it's not very clear, but here's the line between 91 and 87, and you'll see 91 was an H4 CBD, and 87 is part of the the proposed RL 4.0. Now, I will say there has been revised mapping that has come out that reflects these comments that have been made on the application thus far. But when planning staff initially looked at this in the context of the in-zone mapping, 87 Brookfield was residential. Also, the background work that went into Livable Oakville, and I just want to take you there. It was called the Plan for Kerr Village. And the Plan for Kerr Village, if you notice, the study area did not go south of Lakeshore Road. Instead, that plan said the lower Kerr Village District, which where these properties are located, will maintain its existing land use designation from the current official plan, so that's the pre-Livable Oakville official plan, because it was not included as part of the calculations for future development thresholds. So when the previous official plan considered these lands as residential, the background study for Livable Oakville says it's not going to change. The GIS mapping shows that it's residential. It befuddles me to wonder why the applicant, even out of an abundance of caution, wasn't required to make an official plan amendment application to permit this proposed development on that portion of the site. Staff mentioned in page 18 of the report that there's an error in mapping, and Mr. Demchuk was very forthcoming with that in his presentation. But then they proceed to say that this error will be corrected with changes required to be made through a housekeeping official plan amendment. There's no distinction between a housekeeping official plan amendment and a regular official plan amendment in the context of the Planning Act. And I submit to you that the town should not be amending an OP on behalf of a developer to permit a development project, especially when there's clear and convincing evidence of the fact that the lands are probably not designated CBD in the official plan. And further, I also want to call to your attention Section 24 of the Planning Act, which states that you can't approve an application because Section 24 of the Planning Act prevents any bylaw from being passed that does not conform with the official plan. And staff are saying it needs an official plan amendment to correct the mapping. Also, with respect to the official plan, and moving on from the issue of the designation from 87 Brookfield, the staff make reference to OPA 269. And for those of you who were here before Livable Oakville, you'll know that OPA 269 and an implementing bylaw was for the purpose of studying the appropriateness of the transitional area between the commercial areas to the north and the lower density residential areas to the south. Staff make a point at page 11 that note that the study did not apply to the subject lands. And we agree with staff's point, but what they fail to mention is the reason it doesn't apply to the subject lands is because the subject lands were zoned and designated residential. There was no transition issue between the commercial business district and the residential area to the south. But irrespective of the designation of 87 Brookfield, the policies of Livable Oakville are to ensure that the proposed residential uses in the CBD are assessed for appropriateness and compatibility by requiring that a development proposal be evaluated based on the criteria established in 1119. And through that, those are the issues that we speak about, the issues of built form. So the built form is found nowhere else in this immediate area. The scale, the height, and the massing, all of which I submit to you is an overdevelopment of the site. Absolutely, it's a removal of all the trees on the site, a removal of town trees on the site. It's forcing amenity area up into a 4-story, which in many municipalities, if you have amenity area above the top floor, it's actually considered an additional story. It is acknowledged that there was an increase in the setback with respect to the properties to the east, but those increases in setback are to deal with grading and drainage issues and would be required irrespective of the height of the building. The development is to represent a transition between different land use designations or housing forms. I submit to you that there is no transition between the different housing forms. And impacts on the adjacent properties shall be minimized in relation to grading, drainage, location of surface areas, and microclimatic conditions such as shadowing, and I'll come back to that. But I just want to talk to you a little bit about the zoning. The current zoning on the site is H2R8 Special Provision 625, and as Mr. Demchuk indicated, it allows 7 townhouse dwellings. I'm just going to quickly flip over here. With a building height, a maximum 9 meters and 2 stories. So that's the existing zoning on the site. And a lot coverage of 35%. And that's what the residents have relied on for the build out of the 2 sites that applies to, 174 and 91. However, the application seeks to rezone these sites to C3R under the existing zoning. And while the report is silent on this, it's submitted it would be reasonable and necessary to evaluate the application with respect to the C3R standards under the existing zoning. The general regulations for the C3R zone would permit a building height of 13.5 meters and 4 stories. However, for this area, in recognition that the C3R zone abuts a residential zone, the zoning bylaw, the existing in-force zoning bylaw, is very specific. It states, within the area bounded by Maurice, Rebecca, the creek, and the rear lot lines of the property on the south side of Lakeshore Road, a maximum building height of 3 stories and no more than 10 meters above grade. And then it speaks to, and no leasable area above the maximum building height. So for this area, in recognition of those transitional issues, 3 stories and 10 meters. But also look down. Within the area bounded by Maurice, Rebecca, the 60-mile creek, and the rear lot lines of the properties on the south side, a maximum residential density of 50 units per site hectare. It's also, if we go back to the plan for Kerr Village, it's recognized that the CBD allows for 4 stories, but with certain exceptions in certain areas. And I submit to you that this is in fact one of these areas. For this site, there are 37 units proposed, and just from a density perspective, that's approximately 132 units per site hectare, well above the 50 that are that's contemplated in the existing C3R zone. Just for contrast, high-density designations in the town are between 51 and 185. So this would be akin to putting a high-density designation beside a low-density zone. In addition, in the proposed in-zone, and let me be clear here, I understand that the proposed in-zone does not apply, but what the proposed in-zone does is that it implements livable Oakville, and livable Oakville certainly does apply. Under the proposed in-zone, the base zoning for the site would allow a maximum height of 15 meters and a maximum of 4 stories. However, the transitional issues between the commercial zones and the low-density stable residential are also addressed in the in-zone. So if you look here, it says maximum height under the CBD, sorry, and the copy doesn't really show it, but CBD 15 meters, but with a footnote 6 to it. And over in the footnote 6, it says the maximum number of stories shall be 3, and the maximum height shall be 12 meters. Throughout the in-zone process, in fact, if you looked at Mr. Demchuk's slide, it said 12.5 meters. Throughout the in-zone process, it's always said 12.5 meters. That's in fact been lowered in the final form of the in-zone that planning staff is putting for you for approval in approximately 2 weeks' time. So I would say to you, under the new in-zone, it would be looking at a building that would be 3 stories with a maximum height of 12 meters. This is consistent with the provision in the C3R zone in the existing zoning that speaks to a separate zone, if you will, a separate height limit for these areas that abut these residential zones. And then you might ask why the proposed height and density for a building is such of a concern to my clients. And I want to be clear, this is not a situation where residents believe that there should be no development, that the existing development is appropriate. Not even suggesting that the site-specific two-story townhouses are necessarily appropriate for this site or reflect livable Oakville. But what they are saying is that there needs to be appropriate development on this site in terms of height, density, and number of stories, setbacks, transition, and shadowing. The immediate neighborhood, as was noted, is comprised of 1.5 and 2-story buildings. In terms of overall height, you'd be hard-pressed to find any existing dwelling greater than 10 meters. What we have here is a building that's proposed to be 16 meters high with a 6-meter rooftop mechanical on top of it for a total of 22 meters. Imagine if you were the property to the south, that is, or to the east, that is already significantly lower in grade, exactly what it is that you would be looking up at. Moreover, the introduction of commercial uses at grade will be something new for this immediate area, and there's concern about the viability of the proposed commercial uses on the site. In addition, there are some issues that have been raised with respect to traffic. Planning staff have raised no concerns with the traffic study that was submitted. However, residents have, throughout this process, indicated that their everyday experience is very different from that which is identified in the traffic study. There's concern with the introduction of 87 parking spaces, and therefore likely 87 cars, that it will compound an existing traffic problem, especially as it relates to cars leaving Brookfield turning left onto Lakeshore. There's also, which is a non-signalized intersection. There's concerns that cars will now go south and through the neighborhood out to Brock Street, where there is a signalized intersection, introducing a whole bunch of traffic into the area. And shadowing, and if you just indulge me for a few more minutes, planning staff
So before I indulge you, the witching hour is about to strike.
I'll be done.
Will you, well, no, I doubt it. Will you be available to come back tomorrow at 7?
If you reconvene, I will be left with no choice but to juggle my schedule.
Council, are you interested in waiving the procedure by law and finishing tonight? Someone needs to move it if it's going to happen.
Can you give 10 minutes?
To deal with just this item, or the entire agenda?
The only other items left are Trafalgar and the demolition request. I'm your servant, Council. I just need a motion.
I'll give you a motion to go past the hour for an additional 15 minutes.
Do you want to make a decision tonight? Yeah. You might want to just waive the procedure by law then.
Okay, well, I'll give you a motion and see where it goes.
Okay. Councillor Giddings?
We have the motion on the table. I was just going to say that in fairness to some of the other residents that are here for the other events, would it be fair to say if we're able to, if they're successful, Councillor Demoff successful, if we finish this one and reconvene tomorrow? That would be my suggestion.
That's Councillor Demoff's implication, I believe. And so the only other question is, what is the public's convenience? They may wish to finish tonight, for all I know. I'll put the motion to waive the procedure by law requires a vote of a supermajority. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4. Which way did you vote? Not this way. Okay. 4 to 8. You need 9. It fails. Right, but it's an absolute supermajority, not a, right, so 9 is the number required. Pardon? Oh, I voted for it. So that's 9-4, it carries. Thank you.
Your worship, it can't be 4 to, your worship, there's somebody missing.
All right, let's try again. Let's count again. Okay. It's late, what can I say? All those in favor of Councillor DeMoff's motion, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm counting me, 6, 7, 8, it's still 8-4, it fails. All right. And Max still isn't here. So we've reached that moment. We're recessing until 7 p.m. Thank you to everyone for your patience, and we will see you tomorrow at 7.